Indeed, India's Shubhendu Ghosh is joining us live from New Delhi. Hi, Shubhendu. Good evening to you. US and Ukraine, reopen talks on contentious minerals deal. What is the latest you're getting for us on this?
That's right, Siddharth. Good afternoon. Difficult rounds of negotiations are taking place between the representatives of the United States and Ukraine. This meeting is underway in Washington. It started on Friday. It has been inconclusive. It is not one of those negotiations that could have concluded in a day. But the sources informed that the atmosphere, the environment in which this negotiation was taking place was not a very favorable one. A tense atmosphere, antagonist positions, almost reminiscent of the kind of atmosphere that prevailed when President Zelensky had visited the White House, some of the sources inform. The reason President Zelensky had earlier flagged that one of the challenges of negotiating with the US is that the Trump administration is revising its proposal of the minerals deal. Now, the latest update, President Trump wants a more expansive, exclusive, privileged access to Ukraine's resources. There's also suggestion of creating an investment fund where all the profits emanating out of minerals trade, rare earth minerals trade, whether it is done by Kiev, whether it's done by private entities in Ukraine, is going to be deposited there. So sort of geographic monetary control over Ukraine's most precious resources, and Ukraine is increasingly finding it difficult to find its own space and autonomy in deciding how it wants to chart its future. Remember, President Zelensky had said that the minerals deal is important if it can be a win-win situation for both US and Ukraine. Ukraine has a Herculean task of reconstruction. The war is still far from over. It needs those funds for reconstruction, but it needs to be really mapped out the manner in which that profit sharing will take place with the United States. For now, it seems that the two sides are not looking in the same direction, given the difficult environment and atmosphere. But the pressure is also high to be able to reach and arrive at some kind of conclusion so that it could also lead then to bringing in ceasefire in the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Indeed, Shubhendu, certainly what the scenario is right now, it doesn't look like that both the countries are going in the same directions. And also there is no security guarantees.
Oh, absolutely. So in that sense, the bargain that Ukrainian President Zelensky had hoped for in the beginning of engaging with the new administration, that security guarantees would be an important part of it. There is absolutely no mention of it. Not just that, remember, if we look at what President Putin had said as one of his conditions for considering ceasefire, large-scale and sustainable ceasefire, it was that NATO members will not be allowed to come to Ukraine for any kind of rescue, peace efforts. The boots on the ground from the NATO will be seen as an escalation and not an attempt at ceasefire. So in that sense, there is no security guarantee. The NATO support in Ukraine in the form of manpower seems unlikely. And it seems in the negotiations that are taking place, Russia clearly appears to have an upper hand. So in that sense, a very, very difficult bargain for Ukraine when it's really bargaining and negotiating on its most important resource without getting what it wants.
You're right, Shubhendu. In fact, Zelensky called on allies to make progress on possible military deployment, that could act as a deterrent against future Russian attacks. But Shubhendu, what's the latest on Russia-Ukraine conflict? Trump's envoy met Putin in St. Petersburg. How US is dealing with Russia in this particular scenario? US is dealing with Ukraine as well, and we have seen the scenario there. Both the countries, like you've just told us, are not going in the same direction. How the United States is dealing with Russia, when it comes to this entire scenario which we have in front of us?
Right. The approach purely, Siddharth, if we talk about the manner in which US appears to be dealing with Russia, it's sort of entirely different. It's for everyone to see. The symbolism is for everyone to interpret. The kind of pressure that is applied on Ukraine is not the same that is applied on Russia. With Russia, there's an approach as if of mending ties which have really touched rock bottom, At the most, what President Trump is expressing here is a certain irritation that Russia has still not fallen in line, it still wants to continue with the conflict, as opposed to the kind of treatment that was meted out to President Zelensky when he was invited in the White House. The latest from the Steve Witkoff visit to St. Petersburg to hold talks with President Putin. In the words of the Kremlin spokesperson, one shouldn't expect a breakthrough right now. The two sides, as I mentioned, the relations had touched the rock bottom. They are mending ties. They are trying to come to a platform where talks and negotiations can be taken forward. Just important to recollect President Putin's demands for ceasefire to happen. Number one was that Russia is going to have authority over the land that it has acquired in Ukraine. Ukrainian soldiers would have to vacate and leave. Second, there will be no NATO membership for future for Ukraine, a guarantee for that. No NATO support or peacekeeping force. And fourth, perhaps most important for Russia's long-term future, all those debilitating economic sanctions that have been put on Russia by US-led West, they will have to be removed. So the host of areas where negotiations are taking place, President Putin is playing a hardball. He sees a certain strategic advantage in the manner in which the conflict stands at the moment. There are important headways Russia is making. It has reclaimed the Kursk region earlier this week. The latest we hear is that in the Sumy region, at the border of Russia and Ukraine, it has taken over a certain village which was earlier under Ukrainian control. Tit for tat, drone attacks continue. And one of the more shocking revelations that came a few days ago, Siddharth, was when President Zelensky of Ukraine said that Russia may be supported by Chinese soldiers. There were 2 soldiers who were caught, and Ukrainian intelligence says there could be as many as 150 Chinese soldiers or Chinese civilians who are fighting for Russia. So in that sense, this conflict is getting complicated before it reaches any possible ceasefire.
Definitely. And Shubhendu, you talked about Ukraine's NATO membership. It has once again made a strong pitch for NATO membership. Do you think it will backfire this time around? Because that's the bone of contention when it comes to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, for Ukraine, of course, it would have been an ideal situation to be able to get a NATO membership. We know the past 3 years of the conflict, there were some points, especially when the West was united, US and the European allies, there was a certain positive momentum. It wouldn't have happened overnight. Either ways, it takes a long time. The conflict first has to end before a new member is inducted. But with the Trump administration's advent, with the kind of sort of destabilizing position that Trump has put the NATO itself, the power that the European allies would have to unilaterally take Ukraine in, it seems highly unlikely. They're themselves right now engaged and engulfed in a tariff war with the United States. Their own economies, their own priorities are taking center stage at the moment. So while President Zelensky continues to push for NATO membership, it seems highly unlikely. What he perhaps would get, what he is getting, all that ammunition and aid that European partners can muster for Ukraine at present.
All right. Thank you so much, Shubhendu. That was the correspondent Shubhendu joining us from New Delhi. When it comes to the United States and Ukraine, the US is dealing with Ukraine with a very different attitude, and US is dealing with Russia with a very different attitude. But what's going to happen? Only time will tell.